They dragged my 7-month pregnant wife off a stone bench we had built under her grandfather's willow tree, and they did it in broad daylight thinking no one would stop them. What they didn't know was that a judge was watching live through the very cameras they tried to use against us. That moment was the line I swore I would never let them cross again. My name is Marcus Valem. I've spent over a decade building and auditing surveillance systems for federal agencies, the kind of work that makes you hyper-aware of how power operates in silence, in loopholes, in the way rules are written to control people who don't know how to fight back. I thought that life was behind me when we moved to Harrison Crest, a picture-perfect neighborhood with cul-de-sacs and block parties. Elena, my wife, was pregnant again after we lost a child the year before. High-risk, fragile, but hopeful. I built that stone bench so she could sit in the shade for 15 minutes a day, breathe fresh air, and feel like the world wasn't closing in on her. That bench was more than stone. It was healing, a promise. And then came Raymond Stokes, the HOA president. Clipboard under his arm, fake authority dripping from every word. He marched up like he owned the ground itself, reciting some nonsense about unauthorized modifications to community frontage. He stood 2 feet from my wife, glaring at her belly like her pregnancy was a violation of property values. 72 hours to remove the bench, he said, or we'd face fines. He turned and walked off like he'd just sentenced us. Elena sat there, clutching her stomach, her breath uneven. I wanted to laugh in his face, but what I felt instead was that familiar knot, the one you get when someone with a little title thinks they can own you. At first I thought maybe this was just a bluff. But the next morning a violation notice was posted on the neighborhood app, a photo zoomed in on the back of Elena's head while she sat quietly on that bench. Comments stacked underneath. Looks cozy, but rules are rules. HOA keeps our values strong. It was all so smug. And then I saw it, a new security patrol, Corton Integrated Security, circling like vultures. They weren't neighbors, they weren't volunteers, they were hired muscle. SUVs with tinted windows rolled by at all hours. Sometimes they slowed down just long enough for the engine rumble to settle into our floorboards. One day, they even rolled down the window, took a photo of Elena sitting on the bench, then drove off. I started noticing patterns. Mrs. Klein, 3 houses down, used to have hydrangeas in ceramic pots. Gone overnight citation flag fluttering where the flowers had been. Jonah Red across the cul-de-sac used to host poker nights. Stopped cold. Everyone was shrinking, retreating afraid. Harrison Crest wasn't enforcing order, it was weaponizing fear. And it worked. Elena whispered to me one evening, "I don't want to make things worse." She stopped sitting outside, even though the doctor said she needed the calm, the sunlight, the reduction in stress. Watching her give up that tiny moment of peace broke me more than Raymond's clipboard ever could. That's when I almost gave in. I sat up late staring at the HOA charter, wondering if maybe I was the problem. Maybe fighting over a bench was selfish. Maybe protecting Elena meant surrendering, not resisting. I hated myself for thinking it, but the thought was there. What if silence was safer? What if giving up was the only way to keep her and the baby safe? I was ready to pull the bench out myself. And then came Dana. Dana Mullins, the HOA treasurer. Barely a voice in meetings before. She met me quietly by the park coffee cart, gripping her cup so tight her hands shook. She confessed Raymond had been bypassing homeowner votes for months, signing expensive contracts under emergency expenditures. The security firm, the patrols, the cameras, they were all pushed through without approval. She whispered, "He cut my mic when I tried to question him. I have 2 kids. I can't risk being targeted." But then she admitted she never logged out of the financial ledger. She had proof. That conversation snapped me out of my spiral. If Dana, terrified and cornered, could still slip me the truth, then I had no excuse to cave. I wasn't fighting for a bench. I was fighting for my wife's right to breathe in her own yard without harassment. A week later, the confrontation came. A Corton guard stepped out of his SUV heavyset blue polo with their logo stitched on the chest. No clipboard this time, just his phone. He walked straight toward Elena as she sat on the bench, her ankles swollen, her hands resting protectively on her stomach. He leaned in, spoke something I couldn't hear through the glass. She shook her head once calmly, and then he reached for her arm. I moved without thinking. Down the porch steps, across the lawn, faster than I knew I could run. "Step back," I shouted. He froze, startled hand half lowered. "She is 7 months pregnant," I said, standing between them, "and she's sitting on private property. Unless you have a court order, you are trespassing." He tapped his phone, turned, and walked away like nothing happened. Elena's hands shook not from fear, but from fury. That night I filed an emergency petition with the county court attaching a private stream link to our surveillance system. I didn't know if anyone would actually watch, but they did. Judge Harrow herself authenticated the stream. I saw the viewer ID pop up, Judiciary Node. She was watching. From that moment on, I documented everything. Every SUV pass, every patrol pattern, every financial record Dana leaked. I built a case not just of harassment, but of systemic fraud. Raymond wasn't just a bully with a clipboard, he was a tyrant using HOA funds to create a private surveillance network. Dana slipped me a flash drive with 2 versions of the February ledger, one real, one falsified to erase the fact that Corton's contract had never been voted on. That was the crack in his armor. Raymond must have sensed it because he called a closed-door emergency meeting with Corton reps. They tried to vote in a motion to double the security budget and authorize night patrols, all without quorum. Dana texted me from inside. "He's bringing a Corton rep, not approved." I had set up triggers in my system. The moment they attempted an unauthorized vote, files synced automatically to the judicial portal. Proof of overreach uploaded in real time. 2 days later, the county forced the HOA to hold a public session. This wasn't Raymond's private little fiefdom anymore. The room was packed, neighbors, a liaison from the judge's office, even a local news crew. Raymond walked in late, flanked by Corton guards, his usual smirk replaced with unease. He tried to start the meeting, but the projector behind him lit up on its own. A 12-minute reel of my footage played for everyone, SUVs, circling guards, taking photos, and finally the moment one reached for my wife. Gasps rippled through the room. Raymond spun, sputtering. "You don't have the authority to show this." But the liaison stood crisp and calm. "This footage has been verified by the court as part of a protective injunction. It is public record." Dana stepped forward, voice steady now. She handed over the dual ledgers. "He falsified financial records to push Corton's contract," she said. Jonah Red, quiet for months, shouted from the back. "You destabilized it yourself, Raymond. We trusted you." The liaison unfolded a paper. "Effective immediately, Raymond Stokes is suspended from board duties pending investigation into unauthorized contracting, procedural manipulation, and civil harassment." One Corton rep slipped out the door. The other stepped back from him like he didn't want to be associated. Raymond just stood there, pale, silent, with every eye in the room on him. I shut off the projector, looked around at the neighbors who had been too afraid to speak. "You don't have to be afraid anymore," I said quietly. "The cameras are still running, and this time they're pointed in the right direction." That's where it ended. Raymond stripped of power, the contract voided, the judge's ruling permanent. The bench stayed exactly where it belonged. And if there's one thing I learned from all of this, it's simple. Real power isn't in silence, it's in the record.